Uh, First of all, apologies on the fact that I actually use Apple Mac products. I know that Colin has made some remarks, and so did Bernie. But I actually came across a Mac when I started losing quite a bit of my sight, and my dad just said, "Here's a computer that talks," and essentially long began an affair with, well, almost technology from there, because I thought, oh my God, development's so much nicer on this. I can actually use a command line interface for Linux. Amazing. Bring it on. Right, my name is Muzz, and I'm one of those rare breeds of developers who's actually got multiple disabilities, and it's really interesting that we've talked about learning disabilities, we've talked about mobility issues, we've talked about visual impairment. So happens that I have actually got dyslexia and dyspraxia and arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, in addition to having a very rare eye condition, which has essentially made me lose quite a lot of my sight. But technology essentially became a savior for me, and I will explain why. Because my background was industrial physics and astronomy. So I worked at Unilever, looking at the phase space structure of biopolymer peptides, basically meaning that stuff where you can produce nanometer-sized capsules to transport ingredients to different bits of the human body. So say, for example, an ingredient that will go into your skin and repair any damaged skin, or something that will go into your teeth and regrow the enamel back, or ice cream that wouldn't melt that quickly in hot weather, or soup that would taste okay in lukewarm water, tea that would give you extra flavor. Unfortunately, I had to stop because obviously that was a very visual thing. The dyslexic side of me actually could experience that much better, because I could see patterns and I could understand different bond structures, and I could just mask quite a lot of the visual impairment stuff with that. I've always had partial sight, and I eventually got to the stage where now it fluctuates between partial sight and total blindness. So I actually I'm using a Mac here, but my Mac actually is triple booted via daisy chain mechanism. So I actually have Windows 7 and Linux distribution on this machine as well, which was good fun, being a techie who cannot see what's happening in the background, having to configure that, destroying every single bit of data that I had, and then having to reconfigure it several times before getting it straight on. So I'm going to present to you not with PowerPoint, but with Keynote. So I'm going to open Documents.
Finder. Open. 1 of 20 downloads. Folder. 28 of 29.
So, no, sorry.
Downloads. Edit. View. Menu. Go. Menu. Input opens. Open. Documents command. Desktop command sheet. Documents command sheet.
So go Documents.
Documents. Window. List view. Interact with list view. Table. Row 1 of 6. Name. Name. Image. Stop in. Microsoft user data. Norwich hot sauce underline. 2. 8. November. 2. 0. 1. 3. Geek application. Open Finder item. Norwich hot sauce underline. 2. 8.
So,
Norwich hot sauce underline.
I'll say that this is a little bit about me. I've actually traveled from Bristol today, and my master's is human computer interaction. I have worked quite a bit with Leonie Watson, who I have been involved with at the British Computer Association of the Blind, BCAB, which is it's probably the oldest charity of its kind, and it's also the largest charity of its kind anywhere in the world. And from there, I have essentially found on the having moderating their mailing list for so long, I found that there are so many issues that are cropped up with user experience. So again, if you were to look at things like designers and engineers, so scientists and artists, one aspect is compromised over the other. So people who design accessible UX often say that, yes, we will do this, that, or the other, but it's going to have a compromise on other features, say, for example, aesthetics or search engine optimization. People who do SEO stuff say that, well, we could have to do SEO, but it's going to compromise UX. So I'm going to talk to you about how to do accessible design and UX. So here I have
Menu bar. Apple. File. Edit. Insert. Slide. Skip. X collapse. Go to. Submenu. Go. Next slide. Next slide.
I've essentially got a
Toolbar.
Anyway, this picture is actually a snapshot of my bedroom, which has been turned into a mini design lab. So essentially, within this room, this is just a cross section, and everything has been. When I moved into this place, our landlord had not kept this upward. The room was filthy. It had spiders. It had roaches. It had cobwebs. And it seemed like it probably needed a sterilization. So we essentially did that and made sure that the conditions of this room were designed optimally, so that you have right control of temperature. Everything can be adjusted to move back into the background or come forward into the foreground. There's an eye tracking device, a couple of different size screens with different contrast settings. There's an EEG headset within this room. There's a couple of braille displays that obviously I've got here. There's voice recorders, iOS devices, Android devices, PCs, Macs, well, you name it. Any kind of accessible testing. I am one of those accessible testing junkies. So that's essentially what we do. So what can be done in terms of UX design? Well,
Menu bar.
hopefully.
Insert. Slide. Slide. Menu. New slide command shift. Skip slide command shift. Capital H. Go to. Submenu. Go to. Previous slide. Next slide. Next slide. Full meta. Group. Slide. Layout area. Rectangle. Body. Eye tracking. Hand slash body movements. Equals brain activity. Accessibility. Focus. UX. Screen readers. Magnification.
So essentially what you can do, if you are trying to test something for accessibility, you can test for various things. You can take somebody's brain activity, you can take their eye movement, you can see how much they're moving, the amount of sweat they're doing, lie detectors, polygraphs, you name it. I do actually have access to probably the top psychophysics lab in this country. And the person who's supervising my PhD actually used to work for BBC Interactive Learning. So it means that you can collect all this data and use it to optimize your experience. What I wanted you to do is basically close your eyes, and then I would have given you the exact same description of my room, and I would have asked you to open your eyes. Because that essentially is the context, that's exactly the description that's available to anybody who's completely blind. And and some of the symptoms that, Mira touched on this as well, that we talked about designing for people with learning disabilities. Now, there is a massive crossover between blindness and dyslexia. Some of the symptoms are similar. Medical research has shown that dyslexia is caused somewhat because the eyes, essentially, in layman's terms, the eyes don't talk to the brain in real time. So if you were to be given this picture, and I would say, well, there's something else on it. This would be very symptomatic and very almost similar to, say, for example, if I was to go as a person with sight loss, if I was to go to an electronic shop and I say, oh, I want to buy a certain piece of equipment. Oh, but what does this button do? And the person would be like, oh, you don't need to worry about that. And I'd be like, oh, okay, what about that button? Oh, you probably never will need that. Oh, what about that one? Oh, you don't need to worry about that. And I'd be like, how much does that cost? £2,000. Oh, sorry, you don't need to worry about that. I'm not interested. The simple reason is that if you have that level of information that's available on an app or a website that is inaccessible, then not only you're losing out on business, but you're breaking the law. In the States now you have the 21st Century Communication Act, which has even forced people like Microsoft to bring out apps for Windows Phone 8, at least to some degree. There is also there's also several acts here now within the EU, which essentially relate to saying that discrimination on grounds of disability is against somebody's human rights. So if you've got blank information, and obviously Mira mentioned the fact that yes, images are very important. You have to have images so that you can provide information in terms of context to people. Well, if you are unable to see the image, what happens? How much description should be provided for a particular type of image? I can write reams and reams of paragraphs about it, or I can say, well, picture1.jpg. So where does one draw the limit there? This is a very interesting question,
Insert. Slide.
which is,
Submenu. Go to.
actually, funnily enough,
Next slide.
there is a
Next slide.
limit,
Rectangle. Body. WCAG. 20. Standard.
7 words. That's the official guidelines. That's the research being conducted currently by Professor Helen Petrie at the University of York. 7 words, because apparently anything more than 7 words is seen as overwhelming. But how could you describe, say, the picture that I showed you of my bedroom that had so much equipment in there? How could I have described that in 7 words? Any guesses from the audience? Winner wins a prize.
There's a lot of stuff in here.
There's a lot of stuff in here. Yeah, that's good. It's not descriptive.
Not a professional copywriter.
Not a professional copywriter. That's 4 words, actually. It's really good. Any other guesses? See, well, okay. So you by default are the winner, and you win the grand prize of absolutely nothing. Well, in your description, you missed out the fact that my name is Muzz. You missed out the fact that there was a bedroom. And you missed out the fact that what kind of stuff was in there. Was it filled with books? Was it filled with magazines? Was it filled with posters? Was it filled with clothes? Was it filled with food? What was it filled with? You said there's a lot of stuff in here. And stuff can be very subjective. Stuff also happens to be a lad's mag. There's a lot of stuff in here. But that essentially, that's the point, saying that, well, how does one draw the limit? Well, what you could do is test.
Insert. Slide. Skip slide command. Go to.
Submenu.
Go to. Next slide. Next slide. Rectangle. Body. Rectangle. Title. How about both? Layer item.
So essentially, if you say basically that, UX or SEO, I'd say both, because they mean both the same thing. If you have, if you say, for example, one of the jokes I always make, how come all the students at university illegally download torrents, but torrents aren't accessible to me? But the thing is that if you have anything with captions, text, and your images are well labeled, those captions and text are the things that a braille display would pick up. By the way, those are also some of the things that a hearing aid might pick up. And it's definitely the stuff that a lot of dyslexia-specific reading software, such as Read and Write or Lexible, would pick up. But if there is text, that text is also indexed by web crawlers from Google. So if you were to put sensible text with keywords, making it specific to design, then you would be able to make something which is optimized as well as aesthetically beautiful and accessible.
Menu bar. Apple.
So
File. Edit.
what does one go from here?
Slide. Slide. Music. Go to.
Submenu.
Go to. Next slide. Next slide. Rectangle. Title. Ideal for whom? Layer item.
So well, as I say, you can have something which can be ideal for one person, but it's not ideal for another person. So you have to avoid conflicts. Now, one of the biggest conflicts that I know from having been in the assistive technology industry forever, the issue is not often that you have designed something that's accessible to somebody with dyslexia, but not accessible to somebody with a visual impairment, or somebody is accessible to somebody who has a mobility impairment, but not deaf. Often enough, what happens is that because it's such a niche market and you have competing products, one product tends to overlap on the functionality of another. I wrote an article last year on Apple Viz trying to objectively compare the accessibility on Windows and accessibility on Macs. That article on Apple Viz has had over 1 million hits. And what I tried to basically say is that, look, one will connect better, more faster with external peripherals. One gives you more choice of assistive technology products. One gives you better accessibility on the web. One gives you better accessibility on email, and so forth. So if you start wondering, well, something that will work with, say, a screen reader like JAWS, it may not work very sufficiently with a screen reader like Windows Eyes. Well, who do you trust? Well, you can always get user feedback. You can invite users in to come and give you test data under different conditions on different devices from different demographics, having different ethnographic values, and so forth.
Go to. Submit. Go to. Next slide.
But what happens,
Rectangle. Body. Cost of time. Company style. User requirements. Demo.
you have these issues. Biggest one, cost. You can't afford user testing. Your client might say, no, I need something of this nature. If you have specially designed for visual artists, they can be control freaks on each and every single pixel. And you may not get the right thing. Your boss might not like it. You might have a company style that's been around forever and you can't change it. Interestingly, Microsoft's website works better with VoiceOver on a Mac than with any screen reader on a PC. So you have all these features to take into account that you'd have design limitations and you would try and test against all of them. But there's a thin balance. There's a very thin line. You can have the most functional website. It may look horrible. And the other way around. How do you get that balance right? So essentially, you have to get the techies to talk to the non-techies. So the artists talking to the engineers and the program managers talking to the developers and marketers. And that if you have communication within an organization, you will get these things going. So again, communication and data gathering. The other thing is, basically, which is very important, is that Josh mentioned about
rectangle body. How good was the feedback? What will be done?
You basically have making an own design lab, you have a government department services, etc., etc. As the content gets more evolved, because government regulation changes again and again and again, technology standards change. 10 years ago, we never had iPhones. Macs were not very widespread. Linux was still in its infancy with its screen reading software in some cases. XP was king. We all use that nasty thing known as IE5, and so forth. Well, you would get different views. It's almost as many theories as physicists. You have to continually, once you've got some data on feedback, you have to continually reassess it. Keep up with modern times, and do something with that data. There are some people who collect data for the sake of just data collection, and would do nothing with it. There'll be some people who wouldn't collect any data and go gung-ho into doing something about stuff. You have to collect data and you have to do something about it, because it's the only way you're going to get as close to the truth as possible.
Menu bar.
So what do you do
Insert.
in
Slide.
terms of
Slide. Menu. Skip slide command. Go to. Submit. Go to. Next slide. Next slide. Rectangle. Body. Start. Strategy tree. Seeking.
So what happens, where do you go from here? If I say, well, can I make it better with a certain kind of screen reader? Can I make it better with certain kind of braille display? Can I make it better on a phone, on a Mac, on a PC, on an Android, on a BlackBerry? Well, people have often asked, well, what is a good strategy? Well, you can look at, yes, Jared's blog on WebAIM is great, and WCAG guidelines are also very, very good. There is enough accessibility blogs out there, such as Apple Viz, which are independent community resources. One tip, and only one tip, take that away. Stick to standards, because you will find a way that is not only easier for assistive technologies to interact with in a less intrusive and resource hogging way, but it also means that whatever's out there, if it's standard practice, it becomes easier for developers in the future to take care of your code. You could hire new people, fire somebody else, get somebody in temporarily, subcontract something out. If something has a standard, if it's well documented, you'll be able to get on with its change and transition quicker, faster, and in a less time-consuming way. So what do you do? Whose technology you should trust? Who should you talk to?
Menu bar. Insert. Edit.
So
Insert.
Essentially,
Slide. Menu. Use skip slide command. Go to. Submit. Go to. Next slide. Rectangle. Body. Rectangle. Title. Tab to us.
So essentially, our business is Frame3, and we started to address two gaps in the market. To basically work as a commercial entity, compared to AbilityNet being a charity. We're actually a commercial entity, and we're looking at research and development ideas. We are impartial, independent, and platform agnostics, basically, which means we do not subscribe to any particular vendor. Macs versus PC debates, we're not getting into it. Is JAWS better or is VoiceOver better? We're really not talking about that. One system that works best for your needs is the best system. One that doesn't work for your needs is the worst system in the world. And talk to us. We will give you independent advice about what works best. We'll give you detailed feedback. We recently consulted on giving feedback for the Geordie Awards, which is the nomination for the most accessible websites that provide the most accessible content or relevant content to disabled people. Within a space of 3 hours, we gave them a 35-page detailed report saying what works well with what. And they've actually taken most of those things and made their decisions on pretty much most of the findings. Because we not only gave them feedback about which screen reader, mobile device, operating system works with something, it also gave them a feedback comparing it to how the aesthetics play into it, so visual aesthetics. We also do training to blind and partially sighted people and their care workers. And if you get to any training and things, there is a very high chance that your trainer is probably going to be me. And I'm somebody who's actually got qualifications, as I say, platform agnostic. I'm qualified from Freedom Scientific, Dolphin, and GW Micro. Which basically, and I am pretty much the power user at my university when it comes to VoiceOver. So, and the very last slide, I'm going to leave you my contact details. And basically, just if you have any questions, just come and feel free to drop us an email and talk to us about anything at all that you have in terms of needs. As I say, Design Lab is in my room, but it can be ported anywhere. We have the most rigorous accessibility technology solutions in the world. I also, final word, I also have some devices here, which you're more than welcome to play around. So essentially, I've got 2 Braille displays here. So this one here, my pride and joy, is an 80-cell Braille display, which means 80 characters. Its unique selling point is that it can simultaneously be wired up to 2 displays. So it's the Braille equivalent of picture in picture. So the only problem with assistive technology, A, they're not always portable. B, they're very, very costly. So if somebody was to give me a choice, well, would you rather we bought you a really expensive Braille display, or would we rather we bought you a top-end Mac? I'd say the latter. Because the reason is that assistive technology integrated into mainstream makes a hell of a lot more difference to the lives of disabled people than any niche equipment. A, because the learning curve is a lot less. B, you can enlighten a lot of your peers as to how your needs fit in context with theirs. And C, you're always able to sell it.
Thank you very much.